You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Gold, crude oil, corn, soybeans, and more. With so many tradable products, the futures options market can be an intimidating place. How can you possibly keep track of the latest trading developments across so many different products? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Welcome to This Week in Futures Options, the program designed to help active futures options traders stay on top of this ever-changing marketplace. Each week, we'll break down the top trades, hot products, volatility explosions, and much more. This Week in Futures Options streams live, so be sure to check out our live stream via the Mixlr app. That's MIXLR. Or join our live chat room at mixlr.com/options-insider. Whether you're an experienced veteran or a newcomer looking to separate the wheat from the lean hogs, This Week in Futures Options has the information you can't find anywhere else. This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. For more information and educational resources about futures options at CME Group, visit cmegroup.com/options. And now, get ready to break down the latest futures options trading activity. It's time for This Week in Futures Options.
All right, everybody. It is Thursday. It is early. It is 1 p.m. Central. Coming at you a little bit early. Earlier bat time. Same bat channel, though. Yes, welcome to TWIFO This Week in Futures Options, a program where we break it all down in the world of futures options. What's lighting it up in ags or metals or FX or equities or, of course, energy or any maybe a little bit of dairy going to sneak in there. The meats, as the kids call it, aka, your lean hogs and live cattle. You never know what's going to make it onto the show. That's why you have to tune in every week. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, inviting you, if you like what you hear here, you like our guests here, you like talking futures options and vol and skew and all that cool stuff, we go deep into those over there on our pro Q&A sessions exclusively for our pro members. You can ask literally any question about futures options or anything else that tickles your fancy. There are your sessions at the end of the day. Only one place to get them, theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. Welcome to all the folks who've been joining us out there throughout the early part of this year. You're joining a fun party over there. Congrats to our pro member, Alan, who took home the coveted January Pro Trading Crate. You'll take home the February Pro Trading Crate. Only one way to find out. Head on over to the pro. Theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. As we keep on rolling right on into a little bit of the old movers and shakers report.
It's time to find out what's rallying on the light side and falling to the dark side at CME Group this week. It's time for the Movers and Shakers Report.
All right, listeners. I love when we have guests on the old CME hot seat, but I also like when it's just me on the show because I get to choose where we go, where we start our adventures this week. And looking at the overall chart, which we tweet out every week, you can follow us over there at Options on Twitter, listeners. You can see this for yourselves. This is yet another service we provide, another premium chart, another premium report we give to you folks completely for free, just for following us over there at Options on Twitter. If you did that, you could see exactly how things are lining up to the light side and to the dark side this week over there at CME Group. And right now, I'd say it's roughly 60-40, maybe 55-45. That's how close we are to splitting the uprights here in terms of green. More green on the screen than red. And also, when it comes to the largest percentage mover, we're also going to the green this week. So the bulls, the green folks taking it, even if not by much. So you know what? Just to keep things consistent with my brand, I will begin to the dark side, listeners. Number 5, we're going out to Brent. Brent off a little over 2, about 2.02%. Number 4, back to the meats, as Carly called them on the show last week. In particular, live cattle off 2.28%. So wild week here in the meats. Number 3, off to energy we go, from the meats to energy. Interesting leap there, listeners. To WTI in particular, off 2.79%. Number 2, to the dark side, right back to the meats we go. It is feeder cattle. Interesting. You know, it wasn't that long ago these products were trade by appointment, listeners, and there was no volume to back them up. They were not worth even mentioning on the program. Lo and behold, a very different day. Dare I say it? Could the livestock, could those be approachable and indeed tradable products for retail? I think we are at that point, listen. There's enough volume and certainly enough movement. Now you got to do your homework. You got to understand what's going on in these markets. But if they're not too intimidating for you, they are far more viable as a trading product than they were even a few years ago, listeners. Just a fascinating turnaround out there. Number 2, feeder cattle. I mean, didn't we have cattle just on the show last week doing 3x what silver is putting up? And no one would say silver is not a viable product for retail traders. So just wild markets we're all living in. And the number 1 dark side mover, listeners, giving up some of the ghosts, giving up some of its gusto out there, is our old pal Bitcoin, off exactly 8%, back below the 100K level as we're recording the show right now, 96. 228. Didn't get a chance to do a crypto rundown this week, so a good chance to dip into a little bit of crypto action here on the show right now. Looks like we did get up to about, looks like a little bit north of 102 on the Monday session. That was kind of all she wrote for this week. Been pretty much selling off ever since out there. All right, to the light side we go. Like I said, the overwhelming percentage of the respondents this week, the larger portion of names at CME over there in the red, to the green, I should say, to the green this week. So more green names than red this week, as well as the largest percentage mover also moving to the green this week. Let's figure out what they are. First, number 5, listeners, going out to the Ags. It is KC Wheat, up almost exactly 3%, 3.02% to be precise. Last week, almost up the exact same percentage as well. It was number 4 to the light side last week, up 2.98%, so about 6% to the upside over the past couple of weeks. So a good couple of weeks for KC Wheat. Number 4 right above it. Who cares about KC Wheat? We've got Chicago Wheat coming in at number 4, aka SRW Wheat, up 3.4%. As everyone knows, the superior wheat. I'm just kidding to all my KC friends out there. Number 3, from the Ags, we go to the metals, but we're getting base today, listeners. It's copper, up 3.47%. Another one. When we first started this show in the original incarnation, the long and short of futures options, copper options pretty much an also ran. These days, starting to put up some numbers out there. In fact, if we go pull up, let's go get base right now. Let's see how many contracts copper is putting up right now. About 23,000. I've seen them do well north of that, 60,000 sometimes out there. If China's really hot, driving a lot of headlines that week. So 23,000 is certainly tradable. It's better than what we're seeing in Bitcoin by an order of magnitude out there. So intriguing stuff out there in the base metals, but a good week for them, up nearly 3.5%, 3.47%. Number 2, back to the Ags, to oats, up 3.58%. It was number 3 in the other direction last week, off nearly 5%, 4.97%. This is one of the reasons why I like having the futures rundown on the network, which again, another show we didn't get to yesterday. Just a lot of wild stuff going on behind the scenes here on the network, listeners. If you're listening live, send some love to our producer Gene over there on the live chat. She's having a rough week, to put it mildly, out there. But oats, can't really talk about them that much on this show because there's not a lot of options volume. But on the futures rundown, we can, and they're moving quite a bit again, up nearly 3.6%, 3.58%. And number one to the light side, listeners, you probably know what it is by now. It is Thanos. It is inevitable. It is nat gas, up 9.94%. It was number one in the other direction last week, off 22.4%. Just a wild, untamed beast by just about any stretch of the imagination right now. And when we go look up, it's not just moving in the percentage underlying. I would probably wager it's a pretty heavy volume week as well. So it is moving and shaking on both fronts. But before we get there, listeners, let's go out to the CVOL, see what's lighting it up out there on the CVOL front for this week. Remember, you can find these numbers for yourselves. Just type CME and CVOL into literally any browser on the planet. That will get you to the CVOL dashboard. Once you're there, set the high-low range to 1 week. We like a nice grouped list, but to each your own. At the top of our list this week, we have the Treasury yield vol at about 119 and a third, up about 3.25 points. Also pinning the needle to the high end for the week. The low was 109 and 3/4. So quite the range, almost 10 points on the week here for Treasury yield vol. Below it, we have the aggregate energy CVOL, 49.94, just a tick below 50, listeners. Up about 0.58 today, so getting a little bit frothy today. On the week, kind of hanging out towards the middle of its range. The high was 53.43, the low 48.19. And then below it, we have the Treasury price vol, 6.68, up 0.18 today. So it's a decent move when you're starting at a base of around 6.5, 6 2/3. That is also the high for the week. The low was 6.19. So Treasury price and yield vol, both pinning the needle to the upside for the week right now as we're kicking off the show. Below it, we have the FX CVOL coming in at exactly a 9, up about 0.09 right now. On the week, it's at a range of 8.46 to the dark side, 10.04 to the upside. So hanging out towards the lower portion, lower middle, let's say, of that range on the week here. Below it, we have the aggregate commodity CVOL, 33.14, off about 0.11 today. On the week, it's had a range of 32.82 and a high of 35 and a third. So obviously hanging out pretty close to the bottom of its range right now. And then below it, we have the aggregate metals CVOL, 18.61, off 0.16 today. On the week, it's hanging out towards the middle of its range as well. The low was 18.08, the high 19.23. And then at the bottom of our list today, we have the aggregate ags CVOL, 21.79 right now, off 1.27 points. That's a pretty sizable move in ag CVOL today. Hanging out towards the lower end of its range right now as well. The low is actually 21.39, so 0.4 points below it, and the high was 23.09. So there you go, listeners. There's your CVOL rundown for the week, because now it's time for us to keep on rolling. And you know where we have to start, listeners. It is Thanos. It is inescapable. It is time to dive into energy.
It's time to tap into the deep options well of black gold, Texas tea, nat gas, and more. It's time to talk energy.
I see our live chat giving some love to producer Jean. Always a good thing to do. Just in general, good thing to do. She moderates all the chat. She keeps you folks in line. So sending some love her way. Always a good thing, especially on a week like this. Let's get out to the world of energy, listeners. CMEgroup.com/TWIFO, TWIFO, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires out there. And you know, once we're in energy, we're going to go down 3 slots to nat gas because, like I said, it is Thanos. It is inevitable. The Infinity Gauntlet is firmly on the hand of nat gas right now. You know, just last week, listeners, we were talking with Carly about the 4 calls in March, going up, paper buying a boatload of them. Yeah, we talked about 77,000 of the 4 calls in March going up. They were for prices around 18 cents, as I recall, out there. And we kind of thought, that seemed like, Carly wasn't a fan of them, and it seemed like an interesting choice, all things considered. It didn't seem like a lot of the action was going to be to the upside in the near term. Carly was looking more at some downside, even though, to be fair to her, she was saying I think she was going to sit on the sidelines for a little bit and let it retreat first before they got back in. Well, nat gas waits for no one, listeners. Like we said, number one to the light side this week, up nearly 10%. And since Monday, I should say, up about almost 38 cents or about 12.4%. So it's hanging out at a 342 right now, listeners. So just another wild week out here in nat gas. And you know what? You might say, well, okay, it's moving a big percentage, but it's a cheap underlying. That's easy to do. You know what's not easy to do is put up 1.2 million contracts already. So you can take silver, you can take copper, you can take all the livestock, you can take pretty much all the metals complex, throw in some livestock, and throw in, pick your poison of others. Maybe the entirety of the FX complex. I'll have to go add them up. And you maybe still wouldn't get to the nat gas volume numbers out here right now. So this is a serious business product. It is not the 10-year. It is not the E-mini S&P 500 or 3-month SOFR, but it's nipping at their heels, listeners. It is starting to do serious numbers out here. Again, 1.2 million contracts. Again, it is Thanos. It is inevitable. And once again, it is the 4 calls in March leading the dance this week, listeners. In fact, it was March contracts in general. They have about 19 days to go. They put up 40% of that nearly 1.2 million contracts. So March, where the action is, where's the vol right now in March nat gas? You might be wondering, is that about a 62, up about 5 3/4 points. So getting frothy again this week, which is kind of interesting. Also showing you as we continue to climb, the vol ticking up. So the bid is obviously to the call wing, and that is reflected here in the skew. The calls were 6.5% rich last week. So kind of interesting after we took a bit of a dim view of those March 4s, the market saying, we like those. The calls are still bid right now, coming in a little bit this week. Have to come in some when you're rallying, listeners. 5.1% bid this week. The puts, no one wanted them last week, 4.8% cheap. This week, 3.3% cheap. So puts continue to be cheap. Calls continue to be bid. And the action, once again, listeners, number one out here in nat gas with nearly 60,000 contracts are the March 4s. Now, the interesting thing, I said they were going up for about 18 cents this time a week ago. Let's see if we could find, listeners, what prices. And while I'm doing that, I will regale you, listeners, with just exactly what the hell we saw out here from an action perspective out here. I have so many things going up here, listeners, that they're just clogging up my windows. Yeah, these March 4s going up nearly 60,000 times this week. The big day was Monday, nearly over 19, actually almost 20,000 contracts. About 18,000 on Tuesday, 16,000 on Wednesday. Seemed like mostly closing Monday and Tuesday, which again, not surprising. These are not that long to go contracts. You had a nice move coming in on Monday and Tuesday. You're going to take some of those off if you were buying them last week. That makes a lot of sense. 16,000 on Wednesday. Looks like slightly opening there. Only 5,500 today against an OI of 58,000. All right, listeners, if you do have the premium tools, and you should check it out if you're not over there in Bantix, listeners, because Bantix.com, Bantix.com is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fire. Let's see if I could find these nat gas. We want the 4s, listeners. I see a lot of 8s trading. Let's look into yesterday, Wednesday. 8s is a wild strike. But there's so much paper out here, listeners. Finding the pricing for these 4s. Where were they dumping them, listeners? Spoiler alert, probably higher than they bought them this time a week ago. I see 3 3/4, 5s. That doesn't look like the right price. So yeah, I'll have to keep looking here, listeners. Oh, these are spreads. A lot of spreads going up here. 8 calls. By the way, let's go look and see. What are those 8s? I got distracted by those, listeners. These are the August 8s. Paper bought 100 of them for almost 2 cents. So, yeah, probably a bit of a risk management trade. They bought 300 total. And they kept coming back for more. It's like 800. So, August 8th, that's someone who maybe has a near-dated frame of reference for nat gas. They saw what happened after the Ukraine invasion, and we saw 9 and 10 strikes actively trading. Carly and I were joking about that on the show not too long ago. That's a bit of an aberrant scenario. But nonetheless, people taking off the 4 calls this week for some money. So if you liked those last week for 18 cents, congratulations to you. You're doing all right. In terms of number 2, right behind it, we have 50,000 of the 2 3/4 puts. So it wasn't all calls all the time this week. It was a lot of calls, but 2 3/4 puts. Again, we're at about 342 right now. So you like these a little bit better, listeners? 50,000 of these. Again, the big day was Monday. Monday, the banger day, the, dare I say it, explosive day in nat gas options. 15,500 going up. Looks like mostly closing there. So maybe some folks getting the heck out of Dodge, maybe realizing the trend was not their friend and bailing on some of their 2 3/4 puts, or they were deciding to close some overwrites, which would be interesting. But either way, about 15,500 going up on Monday, 11,000 on Tuesday opening there, 13,000 on Wednesday also opening, and today 10,600 against a remaining OI of 34,000. So a lot of action on the 2 3/4 puts in March as well. What about that as a risk reversal or a strangle, listeners? Would you like that? Would you buy that? The 2 3/4 4 strangle? Would you do it more as a risk reversal, sell the puts to buy the calls if you like the upside? Would you do it more as a collar, sell the 4s, buy the 2 3/4 puts? Maybe against some underlying there, and you know you got a lot of room to run till that 2 3/4. Interesting. If you like upside, but maybe 4s, a little bit of a bridge too far for you. How about a closer to the at the money? How about the 3/2 in March, going up 47,000 times this week? Again, looks like closing all week long. So folks are taking their profits to the upside here in nat gas calls. The big day also Monday on these. 13,800 closing all week long. 10,000 on Tuesday, about almost 13,000 on Wednesday, and then 10,300 today against a remnant OI of about 25,500. So again, it's near the at-the-money strike. We've rallied to it all week. If you were long those, you're smart to take at least some off the table right now. Live to fight another day. Take some profits. You never went broke taking profits, listeners. 3.5 calls, number 3, 47,000 of those bad boys. But you know what? Technically, if you want to be precise, listeners, the actual number 3 are the April 4 calls going up 48,000 times. Actually, just ticked 49,000 now of the April April 4 calls. These have about 48 days to go out here, listeners. So interesting stuff out here, listeners. Again, let's see, almost 50,000, 49,000. The big day for these actually Tuesday. 24, almost 25,000 go up on Tuesday. Looks like folks bailing on them there as well. 13,700 on Wednesday, also closing. 6,600 on Monday, again closing. And about 4,100 today against an OI of 37,000. So folks bailing on some upside this week after scooping it up with both hands last week. It seemed like a perplexing trade last week, but it looks like in the near term it paid off. So ballyhoo to you folks. I guess never undersell the potential for nat gas to explode to the upside, because it did it again. Whoops, they did it again out here in nat gas, listeners. How about the 5s? You like the 5s in April? Listen, they traded nearly 20,000 times this week. The big day was Tuesday, 8,600 on Tuesday, 7,200 on Wednesday, both opening. So since it was closing on the 4s, potential for some roll-ups on those same days. If they did it, though, they did it roughly taking off 2 to put back on 1. So that's usually indicative of not a house money roll, but going the other way. Usually if you're sitting on some house money, you do more of the second leg. Or maybe you're just not as convinced of the 5s. I mean, the 4s were already not there. 5 could be a bit of a bridge too far. 3,100 on Monday, mostly closing there on the 5. So an intriguing strike out here, listeners. Let's keep rolling, see if you see any other weird and or aberrant. You know what? The 5s are popular here in October as well, going up nearly 12,000 times. 12,400 to be precise, including the big day today. 5,400 today against an OI of 24,400. So a lot of 400s. About 2,700 yesterday, 3,200 on Monday, and about 1,000 on Tuesday. All opening throughout the week. So opening paper on the 5s. It could be some overriding action. You know, and the call wing did come in. So it could be some folks taking advantage of this pop. By the way, that future in October, again, we're getting into the next leg of seasonality. That's usually where it starts ticking up around that time. Weather obviously getting a little bit colder. That future's at about a 389, almost a 390. So the 5s, not as outlandish in October as they might be here in a more near-dated contract. Like, let's say, I don't know, the Aprils, when we're usually coming down the other side of that seasonality. And you know what? If you want to know what this week's put strip was, looks like it's a 2-quarter put strip going all the way out to January of 2007, 1,000 times each, all the way through till the end of 2007. So an intriguing put strip, 1,000 each every month out there. So there's your nat gas breakdown, listeners. I mean, it is inescapable out here these days. We got time for a few more. I'd love to do Bitcoin. It's just not living up to the hype out here, listeners. So let's have a little fun. Let's go out to our old pal, the Ags.
It's time to get our hands dirty exploring the latest options, trades, and trends in corn, wheat, soybeans, and more. It's time to talk Ags.
All right, everybody, to the Ags we go. You know where to find them. Go to that cmegroup.com/TWIFO drop down and then pop right to the top of the list. It is an alpha order list after all. Then you're going to go into grains and oil seeds, and then we're going to hang out in our old pal Chicago wheat. Haven't hung out there recently, and it's number 4 on our light side this week, up 3.4%. A KC wheat up a little over 3%. And a pretty action-packed week for Chicago wheat, 171,000. But again, you could see nat gas. If we add up the entirety of the Ags complex, I mean, corn's usually good for 400 or so thousand. You start adding up, they could probably get there if we add it all together. But again, you could see why nat gas is dominating the tape these days, not just from an underlying perspective, but volume. It is delivered. It has been a stunning product in many ways. Is Chicago wheat stunning right now? Well, it's having a good week, up 3.4%. If we go all the way back to Monday's kickoff of the week, it's up exactly 5%, or 28.5 handles. That front future at about a 587.5 right now, listeners, if you're not a big follower of Chicago wheat. 171,000 contracts on the tape. Of that, 57% going up in the March contract that has exactly 15 days to go. So we will hang out there. What is the vol, you might be asking, in Chicago wheat? It is at 30 3/4, up 1.15 points out there. So the Ags are one of the few other complexes that could start getting a little bit of juice. 30 is usually, in the 30s is usually kind of the upper band. We could see some wilder numbers if there's something crazy going on, but it's usually pretty short-lived. You can usually count for maybe at least a 30 in some of these products. That gets you a little bit of juice out here versus the metals where you're talking much lower vol levels. FX, you're talking much lower vol levels. Fixed income, obviously much lower vol levels. And equities, of course, much lower vol levels. So you got Ags, and then, of course, you have your energy like your nat gas, and then, of course, you have your crypto in terms of your tiers of vol out there, listeners. In terms of skew, looks like last week the calls were where the action was. That continues to be the case right now. They were 4.9% bid last week, 4.5% bid this week. The puts, 4.5% cheap last week. This week, nearly 6% cheap. So nobody wants the puts, and everybody wants the calls out there, which is kind of fascinating out here in all things Chicago wheat. A little bit of a reverse investment skew, aka a commodity skew, which is to be expected in the Ags, listeners. And in terms of action, what was leading the dance? I said we were at a 587.5 in that front future. It's the par calls, the 600 calls, going up nearly 12,000 times this week, which is kind of interesting. I might think, well, we're rallying, so maybe some folks are buying those, but these obviously seem to be pre-existing positions, because it looks like folks are bailing on them this week. The big day was Tuesday, nearly 5,000, 4,800, 2,500 on Wednesday, definitely closing there. 2,800 today against an OI of 9,600, and about 1,600 on Monday. It's like closing every day, maybe slightly opening on Tuesday, we'll see. But looks like folks are taking some profits on these par calls, which makes a fair amount of sense. We also had some action on the 5/2 puts, the 550 puts, also here in March. They went up about 8,700 times. The big day is today, 3,300 today against an OI of 5,500. So are they bailing on the 5/2 puts today? That'd be interesting. Are they opening up for a little bit of a retreat to the downside? 5/2, that'd be a heck of a move. 5/2 puts right now. Again, the big day today. And then Tuesday, 2,800, mostly opening there. 1,400 and 1,100 Monday and Wednesday, closing on both days out here. Let's scroll around a little bit, see if we see any other interesting and or aberrant paper. Looks like the par call, 600 calls, kind of where the action is, which makes a fair amount of sense. Folks like their even money strikes out here, listeners, including we have the par calls going up again here about 3,600 times. These are in the May contract, have about 78 days to go. That future's at about a 5 98.5. So par calls pretty much exactly the at-the-money call out there. That vol about 31.75. They skew a little bit juicier out there. 9.5% rich for the calls last week. 7.5% rich this week. The puts 8.4% cheap. So the wings more extreme on both ends here in the May expiration cycle. And again, the par call 600 calls going up about 3,500 times this week. Almost all of that, 2,600 on Tuesday, mostly opening. We have about 6,000 open on the strike right now. Not much going up today. So 600s. Again, it's mostly at the money strike, so folks could be piling in for another leg up here. You've been watching wheat, listeners. Is this a product that's on your radar? I mean, it's definitely doing enough paper, 171,000 to be worthy of consideration. If you're intrigued or concerned by all things liquidity, it's no nat gas, obviously, but it could certainly get you in and get you out. Speaking of getting you out here, let's get you out of here with a little bit of the old futures options feedback.
It's time for your questions, comments, and insights. It's time for Futures Options Feedback. Submit your questions at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, stocktwits.com/optionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com. You can also submit your feedback via our Options Insider Radio Network mobile app, available for iOS, Android, and Kindle Fire devices. You can even ask your questions live via our Mixlr chat room. So grab the Mixlr app or just search for Options Insider at Mixlr.com. That's MIXLR.com.
All right, everybody, let's get to a little bit of your feedback out here. We actually have a fun question of the week that is clearly dividing our audience right now. And it goes to the heart of what we talk about here on this show. Obviously, the big news in the markets this week has been the tariffs and their potential to escalate into trade wars out there and their impact across a broad variety of sectors. We asked you folks, these tariffs and the potential threat of escalating trade wars, is this a tempest in a teapot, or do you think we'll be dealing with this in the markets for some time to come? Quite simply, how long do you foresee the tariffs impacting the market and volatility? Gave you four choices: a tempest in a teapot, it's a short-term impact through the end of Q1, a little bit longer term through the end of Q2, or through Q3 and beyond. And our audience is kind of all over the place on this, which again, that's what makes a market, listeners. Right now, we have a tempest in a teapot, still leading, but it's coming down. It was higher earlier, 31.3% now, so just managing to make the number one spot. Number two, 25% say it's a short-term impact through the end of Q1, and a tie for close to 22% each for midterm, so through Q2 and then Q3 and beyond. Where do you vote, listeners? Get out there at Options and make your voice heard over there, just like a bunch of our pro members and others did. We have, getting to the heart of this show, Age of Del Aquarius saying, I include grains in my definition of the markets, so that's why I think this will be ongoing way past Q3. And again, we kind of focus mostly on equities and volatility, obviously, for this question. But if you do expand that purview to cover a lot of the products that we discuss here on TWIFO each week, could be the ags, could be the metals, could be energy, could be, you pick your poison, FX. We could be seeing the reverberations of these potential trade wars and the tariffs for quite some time. So it does, again, depend on your definition. But right now, it's intriguing. Get over there at Options and make your voice heard, listeners. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this Just the Facts, ma'am, edition of TWIFO this week. Do you agree? Is nat gas becoming like Thanos? Is it just inevitable, listeners? Are you trading it? I'm curious. What vector are you doing? Are you one of the 1.2 million contracts that went up this week? Are you trading it maybe against some of your favorite ETFs? Some of those ETFs, we've talked about them. They're not my preferred way to go, but hey, to each their own out there. There are many different ways to get at nat gas and to attack it. I'm curious what you folks. And this volume, again, is becoming inescapable. The movements are becoming inescapable. It might be an intriguing area. We had Derek Salmon on talking about near-dated contracts, trading quite a bit out there in nat gas. So it is becoming more and more retail-friendly by the week out there. So certainly becoming a harder and a harder product and indeed a complex to ignore. I'm curious your thoughts on it. Are you slinging it? Are you getting lured to the dark side, or is it just too explosive, pun intended, for your taste? Hit us up. Let us know. That's going to do it for us on TWIFO today. Also going to do it for us on the network today. Back again tomorrow, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, talking all things Vol over there on Vol Views. And then we're back one final time exclusively for our pro friends holding court in the world of unusual options activity. Yeah, it's a hot thing these days. We've been doing it since day one, since before it was cool, listeners. Check them out over there on the Pro for options, oddities, and a whole bunch more. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro. Then we're back again next Monday with the Option Block all the way through to next Thursday. Another episode of This Week in Futures Options. Stay safe out there, everybody.
This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world manage risks and seize opportunities. CME Group offers the deepest and most liquid options on futures across all asset classes, including interest rates, equity indexes, foreign exchange, energy, agriculture, and metals. For more information and educational resources about futures options at CME Group, visit cmegroup.com/options. This broadcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute trading advice or the solicitation of purchases or sale of any futures or options. The rulebook of the applicable exchange should be consulted as the authoritative source on all current contract specifications. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.